washing with my kids for the first time. Something amazing when you can kind of come together and celebrate that together. Today we're going to continue with our sermon series. We have been looking through some of our key Adventist distinctives, some of the key things that we believe and why they are important. Anyone remember what our first one was? The Sabbath. Next one? The sanctuary. And today we're coming into the third one. And again, I know time is short, so we are again just going to skim through the surface of it a little bit. But I hope that, think about it. If you have questions, come and have a chat to us later. But I do hope that you can see just how important this next one actually is. We have a look at the spirit of prophecy. Now, does anyone here kind of get a little bit scared about thinking about the future? Yeah? No? Is it just me? Sometimes when you're looking at what could be coming up, it can be a bit scary. It can be a bit daunting. You turn on any news channel, you turn on most social medias. You've got the threat of war happening anywhere around the world. Maybe it's something that's happening in your workplace. Maybe it's something happening at home. Maybe it's the ever increasing of the electricity bill. Or maybe it's just thinking about your family, wondering what the future holds for them. It can be kind of scary. And the cool thing is, God doesn't want us to go into the future uncertain. Uncertain about some things, yes, because we still have our free choice. But ultimately, He wants us to know what He is about to do and what He is doing right now. And that can give us great hope. So let's dig into this. According to the dictionary, prophecy means being able to predict something that will take place in the future. Now, this is a pretty good thing. It can be a good thing. Wouldn't it just be great to be able to look into the ball and see what's going to take place? But can you imagine if everything was laid out? That would also kind of be a bit stressful. There was no freedom of choice. You know what's going to happen. Exactly. History reveals to us that many rulers, many kings, many great leaders down through the ages, Alexander the Great, some more recent presidents, looked towards psychics to try and foretell the future. We even have some stories in the Bible of similar situations. You go into any bookstore and there's numerous books telling what's going to happen. You have a look on any social media and there's lots in there. The radio, everywhere around us, trying to predict the future is big business. And there's also an increase in prophesying Christians. Sometimes we try and foretell the future going away from what the Bible actually tells us. But interestingly enough, studies have shown that on average, a psychic only gets the truth or gets the correct answer about 16% of the time. Now, if you calculate what that is, you and I could pretty much get that just by guessing as well. So how can we know what is genuine and what is not? How can we tell the true from the false? Well, the Bible helps us out with that. And so in order to understand this, we need to understand why God gives us the gift of prophecy. Because throughout the Bible, we see it as a gift that God gives us. There's two quotes that I want to leave you with today, or I want to share with you. The first one is from Ellen White. It says, the Lord has a special work to do for His people. The Lord has been pleased to give me a view of the needs and dangers of His people. And especially in 1 Corinthians 14:3. But the one who prophesies speaks to the people for their strengthening, encouraging, and comfort. So from this, we see that prophecy is given to help God's people, to bring them encouragement, to help direct them back to God, to give them a hope, to give them a future. It shows me that we have a God who cares. When you have a look through prophecy and something comes to actually take place, it gives me assurance that God is in control. that we can trust in him, especially when you have a look through the prophecies of Daniel and other prophets, Ezekiel. When what they say takes place, we can have assurance that what they're saying is true. And that in turn gives us assurance that the rest of the Bible is also true. But it's also important to note that a prophet isn't just someone who predicts the future. They also share messages for God's people at that present moment. So from this I see that prophecy isn't just a relic of the past. It isn't just something that God gave 2,000 years ago. It isn't just something that God gave to his movement 160 years ago. It is something that God continues to give to his people as he speaks to them each and every day. Amos 3:7 helps us understand the spirit of prophecy. It says, "Surely the sovereign Lord does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets." Time and time again, when you look back through the Bible, you see before any major event, God sent a messenger. God sent one of his prophets to tell his people. And it wasn't just to warn them, but it was to say, "Come and be with me. I'm going to look after you. I'm going to take care of you." It was to give them hope. It was to give them assurance. Now, obviously, they didn't always listen. As humans, we have that tendency to want to do our own thing. But then God wouldn't just give up and go somewhere else. He would just send someone else. And time again, God continuously, lovingly pleaded with his people to listen. So we see that it is multifaceted. It helps to reveal God's character to us. It does tell us his plans for humanity in the future, but it also reveals his desire for salvation. It tells us his yearning to have us be with him. And this is why it's important to be able to tell the difference between the true and the false. To be able to see what is true prophecy, what is the true gift, and what is the false gift. Because the false ultimately can give a bad image of God. And it's also important that as Christians, we aren't giving the false. We want people to see a good image of God. Paul states the gifts in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 12. And he says what the purpose of all the spiritual gifts are, with the gift of prophecy being one. And it says, for the equipping, for the edifying, for increasing the unity of faith and the knowledge of the Son of God. It's supposed to be practical. Prophecy isn't just given so we know something and then can sit back and do nothing about it. The prophets came to tell the people this is coming up, so go and tell your friends. I want them to be right with God. I want them to be with me. Prophecy is given to be practical. So in these few verses, we see the purpose of it. It's to bring unity of faith. It's to bring us to maturity, to bring stability to our lives, to make us Christ-like, and to prepare us to serve others. So it's much more than just predictions. It helps us to live appropriately in the present time. Time and time again throughout the New Testament, we're told that God's people would have this gift of prophecy living in the end days. And it makes sense. Right down through the ages, God has sent prophets before big events. Why would he not do something like that at the end days? Before the biggest event ever, before his return. And as we see, especially in Revelation, where God's people would have the testimony of Jesus, also known as the spirit of prophecy, right up until his return. A well-known text to us as Adventists is found in Revelation 12:17. And again, I'm sorry, I'm just skimming through this, so some of the basics I have to miss out, but if you have more questions, please come and chat to me later. But we're told the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. We see this talking about Satan coming after God's people, coming after those who remain faithful. And as Adventists, we see, because of Revelation 19, that the testimony of Jesus also refers to the spirit of prophecy. But I also kind of want to have a bit of a side note here, in that when we just say the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy, we also miss a pretty amazing kind of picture that is in this verse. what we actually see in here is that this was written for people back in John's day. And I can guarantee that when they first heard this, they weren't necessarily thinking of the gift of prophecy. But for them, the commandments of God would have been the Old Testament. The testimony of Jesus would have been the writings about Jesus Christ, what we have today as the New Testament. And so the other picture that we see is not only do God's people, because of our understanding today, have the spirit of prophecy, but they are also people who believe in the whole writings of God, that hold value in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And that's a pretty amazing picture if we actually understand it in that way. It's important for clarification, and I don't think that this takes away from it also being the spirit of prophecy. A clear example of this was in the life of David, of what prophecy actually meant for people. David had done some pretty crazy things. More recently, he had just committed adultery. He'd had the husband of Bathsheba killed so that he could have her. And for a while, he thought it was going good. He thought it was smooth sailing. Until the prophet Nathan came along and gave him a bit of a kind of nudge in the side and just said, God knows. God knows what you're doing. And he tells a pretty amazing story to help David see that God knows what he's doing. What we see from this story is that the messengers weren't just about predicting the future, but they were helping God's people to understand what he was doing, to understand how he wanted them to live. And so in his great love, God sends his prophets to help his people. And throughout the Bible, we see God using different ways to speak. We see Isaiah and Jeremiah speaking both words of warning and comfort. We see John the Baptist speaking of the coming of Jesus, just to name a few. And again, prophets receive messages in two key ways. You've got visions and dreams, and you've also got the Holy Spirit impressing upon their minds. We should also note that not all of God's prophets were Bible writers. We don't have the book of Elisha or Elijah or Nathan. Jesus said that John the Baptist was the greatest of all, and yet we don't have a book from him. We should also remember that not all of God's prophets were men. You had Deborah, she was a great prophetess. Huldah was another, and the 4 daughters of Philip were also prophets. It's not just a male thing. But how do we tell what is true and what is not? The Bible actually gives us some tests. And I want to just quickly go through these so we can help assess if something is true or not. The first test is prophetic accuracy. A true prophet has to have 100% batting accuracy. If they're false, they're not going to be telling the truth. Secondly, they have to have biblical faithfulness. Their message will agree with the Bible. If it disagrees with the Bible in any way, they're not a true messenger from God. Thirdly, we see they exalt Jesus. They testify of him. They lift him up. Fourthly, they keep God's commandments. Obviously, they have to practice what they preach. And lastly, we see they exhibit good spiritual fruitage in their life and work. As the saying goes, you'll know them by their fruit. And it's important to know those texts. And again, we have passages that help us with that. I'm not just making those up, but just for time, we're skimming through. And so today, this brings me to why this particular topic is important to us as a movement, to us as Adventists. The gift of prophecy is something that is given to the end times, to the people. And it's important. And when we have a look through the book of Revelation, we see that this gift signifies 3 different things. Firstly, we see it signifying the Bible, written by God's prophets, being the basis of everything that God's end-time people believes in. Secondly, we see the gift of prophecy and revelation also referring to the book of Revelation. It tells us, blessed is he who reads and understands these words. In other words, the book of Revelation will also be highlighted by God's end-time people as God's message to his end-time church. And finally, the gift of prophecy means the prophetic ministry will be active in God's people. So why will God do this? Why does he want to speak to us? Well, to help us be ready for him, to help us come to him. And this brings me to a certain lady named Ellen White. And I want to share a little bit about her for you today. And I'm going to share with you what I think about her, but I want you to make your own decision based on what we've already said and what we're going to share now. We see that she was born into a Methodist home. At the age of 9, she was seriously injured on her way home from school when one of her friends threw a rock which hit her in the face, triggering a series of health problems, which essentially ceased her schooling at a young age. She had her first vision at the age of 17, which was up for and thereafter until her death at 85. And over that time, she received more than 2,000 prophetic dreams and visions, which she recorded. And even during some of her dreams and visions, supernatural events were taking place. At one point, she was able to hold up a Bible and flick through it. It was a heavy Bible. And to flick through it to references that she was talking about during her vision, while not even looking at the Bible. At other times, she actually would go into the special kind of stance where she actually wasn't breathing. A medical doctor who was a skeptic came along one time and discovered that indeed she wasn't breathing for about 2 hours at one point. But it's also important to note that this doesn't mean that she was a true prophet. Having these kinds of supernatural events could also come from the other side. So it kind of raises the question, how then can we know if it is true or if it is not? During the course of her life, she wrote over 50 books. She lectured to thousands on 3 different continents. But was she a true prophet? How can we know? Can anyone tell me? What did we just look at before? The Bible gives us tests. So, let's have a look at it. The first test, prophetic accuracy. In 1902, she actually gave a warning about 2 cities. And a few years after this, 1906, San Francisco and Oakland were largely destroyed in a catastrophic event. She also prophesied many times about things that would take place during the Civil War. And on every occasion, it actually came to true. In the early 1900s, she also wrote about great trouble that was going to be coming like never seen before. Shortly after this, we had World War I and then World War II. In the last century, or in that century, we had some 180 million deaths due to war alone. What about biblical faithfulness? In Great Controversy, she wrote, "In our time, there is a wide departure from the doctrines and precepts of the Bible. There is a need of return to the great Protestant principle, the Bible and the Bible only as a rule of faith and duty." And speaking of her own writing, she wrote, "Little heed is given to the Bible, and the Lord has given a lesser light to lead men and women to the greater light." In her own words, she continuously pointed people to go back to the Bible. And one time she actually said, if you were reading the Bible, you wouldn't need me. She very much lifted up the Word of God. The third test was they exalt Jesus. In Gospel Workers, she said, "Lift him up, you that teach the people. Lift them up in sermon and song and prayer. Let all your powers be directed to pointing souls, confused, bewildered, lost to the Lamb of God. Lift him up." And again, you could read through any number of her books and see her exalting Christ. Fourthly, they keep God's commandments. She continuously exhibited this throughout her life. She exalted the importance of living by all of God's commandments, including the Sabbath, which went against the culture of her day. And lastly, you will know them by their fruit. Well, when we have a look at her fruit, she has given the movement a lot of guidance on very practical subjects. How to walk with Jesus, how to have a happy marriage, how to raise children, how to have good health, the importance of Christian education. Thousands of people have been impacted worldwide because of the directions that she has given. Our education system is now the largest Protestant one worldwide. Our healthcare is not far behind it, worldwide. Because of her encouraging missionaries, The movement is now in almost every country right across the world. When Ellen White died in 1915, the New York Independent newspaper had this to say of her. She showed no spiritual pride. She sought no filthy lucre. She lived the life and did the work of a worthy prophetess, the most admirable of the American succession. And that's a pretty amazing statement to be made by an independent newspaper. Now, I know there is a lot in this talk, and I've just skimmed through it, and there's so many more I'm happy to go through with you afterwards. But in looking at these 5 texts, and again, you can dig into it more, even greater than what these 5 are is also from your own experience. As you read through someone, do they draw you closer to God? Do they draw you into a deeper understanding of who God is? Do they encourage you to come to Him? Well, that's for you to work out if she does that to you. But I know for me, she paints one of the most beautiful pictures of Jesus that I've ever seen. She helps me understand Him more and His plans for my life. But as we finish up, I want to encourage you with this passage. In Joel chapter 2, verse 28, it tells us, and it shall come to pass afterward, that I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions. I want to encourage you, because a lot of the time, especially as a church, we look at it and we say, if we believe that Ellen White was a prophet, well, we've had our prophet, but that's it. And then we've kind of got this almost nothingness where God isn't speaking to us anymore. God prophesied, God told us that He will continue to speak to us until He returns. God isn't done. And while we can continue to use the prophets that have written in the past, I want to encourage you that God still has prophets today. Young and old, male and female. This is still relevant for us today. The spirit of prophecy is still a gift that God gives His church for the edifying of the movement, for the building up of people. So I want to leave you with a question. What may God's message for us be today? What could a modern day prophet be saying? Is it a current social, moral, or spiritual issue? Is it providing timely assurance or guidance for God's people? Is it exposing sin? Is it calling for justice? Or is it offering hope in the face of uncertainty? Whatever it is, I want to encourage you that God still speaks. Listen. Open your ears. But above all, as we've looked at today, bring it back to the Bible. Does what we hear match up with the Bible? And if it does, God might be talking to you right now.